It's my best slide. Oh, it is my best slide. What do you know? It's a little limiting over here. Well, I guess it is what it is. So all this really says is I've been there, done that, have the t-shirt, and have done Agile a lot. And I'm currently also the founder of a company called Nexel. If you're interested in becoming more organized in your life, you could check that out. And was once president of Agile New England many, many years ago. So today we're going to talk about user stories. I'm actually going to talk about user stories as short as I possibly can, and then you guys are going to play games, which is going to be fun. And you might be thinking, how can we learn how to write user stories playing games? Well, you can. So first, I want to tell you my philosophy on user stories, which starts with my philosophy on products. Products do not start out with 10 teams from scratch, although you can try that. They start out with a single user story. Now you might think, no, we put 10 teams on that, and we did a whole bunch of stuff, and I can tell you that when it first worked, it worked because you got one thing working. And then you got another thing working. And then you got another thing working. And it's a lot easier to get that first thing working when you're only doing the first thing instead of 100 things simultaneously. Another way to look at it is you have a plant. Now, I don't know if you're a gardener. I'm not. But I've been advised that dumping a whole bag of fertilizer on this plant, putting grow lamps all around it, and then dumping a bunch of water on it is not recommended. Guess how fast this plant will grow? Okay, leaving aside the fact that it's not a real plant. Anybody? Yes. The fastest it will grow is as fast as it will grow. And it will grow no faster than that. But it can grow slower, including die. Right? It's the same thing with any product. So my advice is start with a single user story. Now you might think, you cannot have a product with a single user story. Yes, you can. You can have a product with a single user story that you put together in as little as 1 week. Any product can be started with that single user story. Then it grows, and then it grows, and now you have the product that you always wanted. So that's my philosophy on products. Here's another way to look at it, and also conquer the pixel perfect. How many people have heard of pixel perfect? Okay. How many people have worked in software? It's almost the same answer. So many people will tell you, you want to have the pixel perfect design first so it can be approved. How many people have ever seen the final product look exactly the same as the pixel perfect design? Wow, I wore you out with just two. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't ever happen unless you have a product which is a single black pixel. Then that could work, right? So you end up with the final product, which is not the same. If you look closely, you'll see the triangle moved and the circles is gradiated there, but not, or whatever, but not there. All right? But that final product is approved by that UX person. Alternative idea, you start out with the UX person right from the beginning and you say, hey, we have this single user story which produces this. Now nobody does UIs that look like that, but this is just a stand-in for a real product, right? It's symbolic. And then you grow it, and you grow it, and you grow it, and you grow it, and oh hey, it's actually different than the one on the top. But since the UX person was involved all the way through, he got to make design choices with you and came up with an even better final product which has his approval. Now what does that have to do with writing user stories? They go hand in hand. There's a belief system behind this, which is my number one tip for writing user stories, which comes right after this slide, apparently. First, let's talk about an autonomous team. So you've probably heard of cross-functional team. Now, you may or may not be doing Scrum, but let's just say, for instance, that you're doing Scrum. So this is your Scrum team. Now, I want you to imagine that you have the Scrum team, and it's really cross-functional, and they're not working on any other projects except what's in their backlog. Just fantasize with me for a moment, OK? It wasn't intended to be funny, but OK. So imagine what this team could do in 2 weeks. All right, just mentally think. This team, 2 weeks, cross-functional, they've got whoever they need, the UX person, whatever. And they're going to create at least one user story. So here comes my number one tip. And before I tell you what the tip is, I'm going to do one more survey. And it's not a test. You can feel comfortable voting yes or no on this, right? That's fine. I'm just curious. Do you raise your hand if you believe that you can absolutely start from a single user story, which does something useful that somebody would want, whether you put it in production or not, and then every couple of days have a brand new product that is different by at least one new user story that does something that somebody will say thank you for, right? So one story is your first version, 2 stories is your second, 3 stories is your third, et cetera, and those are coming out and ready every couple of days. Raise your hand if you believe that's possible. OK, my number one tip is have that belief, and you will write better user stories. All of my other advice is secondary. Now, you might be thinking, well, you're just saying all I have to do is raise my hand and woohoo! No, what I'm saying is, if you don't believe that, I cannot convince you with the rest of this talk. What I can do is give you advice on how to write better user stories anyway, and when you get to raising your hand, you'll get even more benefit from that, right? But that is my best tip. Another way to look at that is, if you did not raise your hand, ask yourself, why? You might say, well, because it's impossible, I don't agree with you, it's never worked, da, 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 da. And I will say, I'm standing up here saying, I believe it is. And you saw a lot of other people raise their hand, too. Not saying that there's anything wrong with you, or you got your head screwed on wrong, or whatever. Just saying there's something there to learn, and that's not something that I can give to you in slides, or even in the activities. But that's my number one tip. Get to that spot, and you will automatically write better user stories. OK, moving on from that. So some people call them products. Some people call them epics. Some people call them stories. Some people call them capabilities. Some people call them features. Some people call them God knows what. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you have big blue boxes and you have little blue boxes. That's the important takeaway here. It's true. And in between, they're all different sizes. These down here that can be implemented from start to production in less than 2 weeks are user stories. Everything else is not. The biggest ones are products. Everything in between, I don't care what you call it epics. But the goal is to get down to user stories, because these are the things that you can actually implement and put into production. Oh, and there's some examples. Bring your own device data backup for large businesses to protect IP. That's a product. Reporting for that. That's an epic. And there might be a lot of epics there. An admin wants an automated daily report on storage usage to help spot trends. That's a story, right? There are some examples. And for those of you that are very familiar with this, I am just very rapidly going through some of these things just to set the base level here, so we're all talking about the same things. There are 3 components of a user story, and it has nothing to do with as a I want so that. That's syntactic sugar. You cannot take a 20-page requirements document, go to the top line, hit new line and put in as a I want so that with anything in there and turn that thing into a user story. No, you've got a traditional requirements document with a new line in it and some syntactic sugar, right? Putting that syntactic sugar in there does not make it a user story. Having a definite who, having a definite what, and a definite why are the only things that make it a user story. Some other things, Bill Wake's Invest is fantastic. If you've ever heard of Invest, estimatable, not estimable. Estimable means you're worthy, right? Just so you know. It's estimatable. Is it estimatable or not? There's some value right there. We're not going to really cover independent, but I will explain what independent really means. Imagine that this is your backlog, and each index card is a user story. And I take your backlog, and I print it on 3x5 cards, and I go like this. I'm not saying you should do this, but you have independent stories if you can then implement in this random order. Don't do that. But if you could, now you have independent stories. That's what that means. And you might be thinking, oh, that's not possible. I understand. I'm just telling you that's what that is. Negotiable is a really weird word. I don't know why it was picked. I believe the only reason it was because it starts with N, and it works out really well in Invest. All the others make sense to me. That one, not so much. Negotiable, all it really means, it doesn't mean it's a negotiation. What it means is that you have not put words in there like JCL, Oracle, database, backend, things that consumers will say, what is an Oracle? What is SQL? What is Java? What is Angular? If those words are in there, it's not negotiable. The other thing is that the goal is left open. So if you say, as a user, I absolutely positively want to type in my street address 100% correctly so that I can anything, that's not negotiable, right? More negotiable would be something like, as a user, I would like to find stores near me. What is near me? I don't know. Could be GPS, could be zip code, could be street address, but that's negotiable. So we'll go through all of these in a little bit more detail, but these are the things we're going to talk about. Wow, that's a much better example of negotiable. Awesome. So closed shopper wants to something so they can decide if they have enough time to shop. If you look at all of these, they are different levels of negotiability. So find stores nearby is probably one of the most negotiable ones, but absolutely the most negotiable would be find stores. Why did you say near me? Maybe I'm going somewhere and I want to put in an address, right? The important thing here is find stores. Now, when you actually get to planning, the product owner might say, OK, I went to Damon's class too, and blah, 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 but I want GPS. That's fine. That's fine. But at least now we know that find stores is the important thing, and we can talk about it. Valuable. People say, oh, I know what valuable is. I don't know. I still run into people that say it has value for me as the developer. Are you paying the bills? No. Then we don't mean you, right? It's the actual customer, right? If you're at a store and you have source code in your hand and you hand it out to somebody and they give you money, okay, well, sure, then it has value. Other than that, no. So here are some various stories, and take a look at them and see which ones you think are valuable. All right? There we go in there that are valuable. The ones that are not a database, it's interesting to have it in the database, but if I can't access it, it has no value. Yes, having a user be able to upload something is awesome, but if they have some other step they need to do for it to be useful to them, that's not actually valuable. So the next one up, I'm going to skip estimatable. Estimatable is pretty straightforward. That's just, do you feel ready to say how long it will take? Yes or no? That's boring. Small is one of the absolutely most important things. Getting to small is super hard. I was working at a payment processing company once a while back in Texas, Heartland Payment Systems. And when I got there, they had been happily doing Scrum for 3 years. And they were working on this new thing, and they'd been working on it for 7 iterations. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned their name now that it's being videotaped. Oh well, it was long ago. They're fantastic now. They got over this early childhood trauma. With 5 teams. So that's 35 total iterations, right? 7 iterations across 5 teams or the other way around. I forget now. Anyway, it's the 35 iterations. And I said, great. So I can't wait to see the sprint review. And I went to the sprint review, and they talked about code reviews, and they didn't show anything. And I said, how come you're not showing anything? And they said, ha, aren't you a smart guy? So in our world, what we're implementing is swiping a card through a reader and adding Amex. That's our entire new thing. Split that. It's like, OK, that's a good challenge. And we did. And I'll follow up with that in one moment. There are many ways to split a story. One is by separator. And you can poo-poo this. But if you find commas or the word and, or, not, any kind of separator or a list of things, you can split it. So here we have moviegoer wants to find movies in theaters, read reviews, blah, blah, blah. That's all of these stories. Now, very often, developers will say to you, yes, but while I'm in there, it'll be more efficient if I just did it all. That's fantastic. So you get it all done 2 weeks later, and you do the testing, and find movies doesn't even work. And now you find out that all the work that you did for all the other stuff was also done poorly. Now you got to go back and do rework, which we all love, right? So do it by story. It will be good for you, all right? So that's one way to do it, absolutely positively. Here's what I was referring to. So for them, I said, so all you got to do is swipe it. And in all the places in the world, they only have one reader, and it's the square, right? And they said, aren't you funny? That's not true. There's also this thing, which I'd never known the name of. It's the, well, you can read it. I'm not gonna. And they had many, many other readers. And they had these readers in restaurants and on planes and in cars. It's a true story. And they had different credit cards. Now, this one was for American Express. So for them, the actual breakthrough story was, as a restaurant user, I want to use this thing so that I can pay for my meal. And it turns out that restaurant users very infrequently do credit disputes. And restaurants almost never want sophisticated reports. And so they were able to break their product down into stories that way. Even though, at the end of the day, from their perspective, it was just swiping the American Express and it worked or not. You can always, always split. So this one is splitting by user, persona, or market, right? So different markets you might have is the car market, airlines, restaurants, different readers, different cards. And there are some other examples of how you can break it down. There's always a way to get to a small user story. Another one is splitting by test scenario. This is actually one of my favorites because everybody knows how to write test scenarios, right? So no fail, people say, oh, we can't split this. And I say, OK, all right, you're right. Let's move on to testing. So if you were going to test this, what's one thing you would do to test it end to end? And they go, oh, well, clearly you would do these things. And I'm like, bingo, there's a user story. So, right? So test step would be for the greeting card company product, select Father's Day card, because you got to select something to test. Email delivery, the free version, because, right, you're in testing. You don't want to pay. Destination email, and then you hit send. Right? So the user story there is, and your expectation is a Father's Day card is received. That's the expectation. So the user story is, person wants to send a free Father's Day card via email to express their love. Now this Father's Day card, if I were to graph it, would just say, Happy Father's Day. No pictures, no nothing. But you can send that in an email and test that everything's working, right? So test scenario, boom. Boring user story, but it's still a user story. And you know what? If you can't get this working, why would you do anything else? Not testable. Stories should be testable. That's the T in invest. Shopper wants interface to be fun, so they are happy while shopping. How do you test for fun? Who here is in QA? Anybody? Okay. How would you test for fun? Okay. There we go. Well, you can make both of these testable with some small changes, right? So shopper wants fun, C asterisk, interface, right? So fun defined as an average of 4 out of 5 people talking to 5 internal users, you got a 4 out of 5 on the fun scale. So basically they say, if I were to have a fun scale, that was a 4, right? So you can test that. You might say, well, the 5 internal users are not our entire customer base. Got it. You can't actually test for fun, but you can do this. Quick decisions. What the heck is quick? Right? I'm thinking as a developer, getting it down to 5 minutes response time, that would be a victory with this system. And the product owner was thinking half a second. OK. So he puts half a second on there, and after 5 minutes of the whole team laughing, right, we come back and we say, OK, that was really, that was a good one, half a second. We could do a minute in this iteration. How would a minute be? Well, it's a lot better than 5. OK, good. Right, so that's testable. Some way to know that anybody would know, have we completed the story or not? So now we're going to play games. And as an example, almost all of the games involve flipping cards over and sorting them. So we get a whole bunch of games. And actually, let's see. What was our signal? I'd go like this, or cuckoo. Or, oh, no, I know what it was. We came up with the very boring, hey, Richard, I could use your help. Yes, OK. So there's 4 stacks there and 4 chairs marked do not move. So the way the games are played is there's a whole bunch of boards, playing boards, and cards. And each playing board has different instructions on it. So for instance, for this one, story splitting game, 5 minutes. There's a whole bunch of cards here. And you need to sort the cards into either good split or bad split. After you've sorted them, you turn them over, and it'll tell you, was it a good split or a bad split? This is not a test. The important thing in these games is the discussion that you guys are going to have with each other. And you may argue, and you may say, oh, there's a typo, or that's Damon's wrong. That's fine. It's the discussion that's the important thing, all right? So I want you guys to have fun. Please don't start yet. There are 4 game stations. And the way this works is you're going to break up into groups. And you'll send an emissary over here to pick one of the games. Then you'll go back, play the game. When you're done, reset the game and bring it back to one of these stations so somebody else can do it. Because to have every group have one of the games would just, well, I'd still be at home cutting the cards. So can't have that. So the way it works is you have a card like this, right? So one of the value games. Moviegoer wants to add e-tickets to shopping cart to skip line. Is it valuable or not? So you turn it over. After you've decided is it valuable or not, you turn it over, and it will tell you, no, it's not valuable. Or, yes, it is valuable. All right? Some of the games have 2 decks. So when you look at it, if it has like, I don't know, like a W1 and a W2, just pick one. For instance, W1, put the W2 aside, and you can play the game with the W1 deck. If you really like that game, you can play it again with the W2 deck. All right? And if you mix them together, I guess that would be fun too, but that's not the intention. You can do the games in any order. They're independent. Try to stay within the recommended time box. We're not looking for long-winded discussions about one story and whether it's valuable or not. Pick and go to the next one. So there is a time box. Use a timekeeper if you need to. So the cards all start story side up. And you can tell they're story side up because there's a little circle in the lower right. Make sure you shuffle the cards before laying them out. And for most of the games, you do separate the cards into categories, so read the instructions carefully. One of them is negotiability, and you're going to rank them from most negotiable to least negotiable. I also have a secret squirrel game up here. Anybody that is interested in playing a potentially complicated, untested game, come and see me. When you're done, turn them over, check the answers. It's not a test, I mentioned that. If any of you brought user stories and you want to use those stories instead, write them down on a 3x5 card, and you can use those as the stories instead. Lastly, you're going to break into teams of 4 to 5 people. 3 is too small, 6 is right out, and there are little stations all around that you can use to gather into groups of 4 or 5. Yeah, 4 or 5. And all right, so go for it.
Expressing their love is the object of the story, and the story presents a way to do that, a way to accomplish the object.
So anyway, I'm looking for questions that you have about user stories in general. Or if you'd like to share a fun fact about the game or a conversation that you had while you were playing the game, I'm interested in those.
I have a potentially divisive topic that I'm sure you've heard before. Tech debt. Tracking that and managing that from the purest standpoint and that sort of thing. I always get conflicted because it's not directly delivering customer value. They don't care that we updated our LWC from 4.1 to 5, 1.5 or whatever. So how do you reconcile that with also tracking the work and getting it done and all that on the backlog?
Just to clarify, was that a question or a statement?
That was a question. How would you handle tech debt?
Okay, how would I handle tech debt? Well, I like to handle tech debt like I like to handle my credit cards. I like having credit cards, but I also like not paying exorbitant interest rates, right? So a couple thoughts on technical debt. Number one is do not do technical debt stories. That's my advice. Customers do not care about technical debt stories. Now, I'm not saying don't fix your bugs. I'm not saying that. But you know what? If you can't reasonably connect the change you're going to make to fix technical debt to a story you're working on right now, why are you doing it? Because what happens when you touch code for just any old reason? It breaks. Now, raise your hand if you have 100% code coverage. All right, you could do it if you want to. That's fine. Instead, what you can do is you can have a conversation with your product owner and say, you know what? We have not maintained our car in a while, and there's a chance that we're going to go off a cliff accidentally, just so you know. Now, that said, there's been no complaints recently, but we have this new user story that you want us to do. And if we had no technical debt, that would be a 1. And it looks like you want to spend a lot of time in that area with these other stories. And we're thinking that while we're in there, we should do some cleanup. And so that's going to make it a 3. But that means that the other stories in that area are now going to be 1s instead of 3s. And going forward, our velocity will stay at a good place. However, if you say, no, I don't want you to fix that technical debt, at some point in the future, our velocity is going to creep down to somewhere around a 0 or a -1, and we're probably going to drive our product off a cliff somewhere. That's my philosophy.
I noticed that in the splitting game board that we had, the explanations for good split, bad split, repeatedly mentioned with the bad splits some aspect of value not being met. So I don't know if it was because we kind of rushed through the explanation and definitions of invest, or just so if you could expand on how you use the concept of value and the criteria of value when you do splits.
Okay, so really that game could also be called, is it valuable or not? But the idea is just to show, I've got this big thing, and here's a smaller thing, and it can be done, and here's some examples. But if you take something and you say, like you've got like the greeting card example, one way that's suggested by some people to split stories is the workflow method. So hey, I've got something that can't be done in 2 weeks, but selecting a card I can do in 2 weeks. Customizing the card I can do in 2 weeks. Selecting the recipient I can do in 2 weeks. Payment methods I can do in 2 weeks. And actually physically sending the card I can do in 2 weeks. At what point do I have any value? At the very end. So I wasn't splitting this. That's not story splitting at all. I created tasks. So the idea of valuable is for any story, if you look at it and that was all that you did, either as your first story or you have an existing product and you add that on, if after you add that on, people go, I don't really know what you did, and you go, oh, well, the database queries are faster. You're like, well, I don't really know what a database query is, then it wasn't valuable. A good indicator of value is you have a good hope that somebody, after seeing the version of the product that is only with this new story, they're going to say, oh, hey, thank you. If you're like, oh, there's no way they would do it with that, then it's definitely not a user story. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Mr. Grable? I want to pick on Grable because I don't think I've ever had a question from him. So I'm really curious to know what it is.
So when stories get split into tasks, there's frequently a do something, get feedback, respond to feedback, deliver. Right?
Can't hear you.
So it's respond to feedback and then deliver. When the get feedback is external to your organization, like legal review, and cannot possibly get done in less than 4 to 6 weeks, you're now left with a dilemma of either having incomplete stories that are badly split because they're split by tasks, or stories that can't possibly complete within a sprint.
Yeah.
Is there a better way to handle it?
No. So I'll give you my opinion on that. I give you all my permission, if you need it, to go outside the boundaries of an iteration. It's okay. I also give you my permission to drive in the breakdown lane if there's a drunk guy coming behind you, and you'll die if you don't go into the breakdown lane. So do what you got to do. But if you find yourself in the breakdown lane a lot, there's something wrong with that road. Don't go there, right? So if you find that you're running into that problem, there are two things you can do. And this is an important part of what Agile, the real meaning of Agile. The real meaning of Agile is finding problems like that and actually changing them. It is not saying, how can I adapt Agile to stay exactly where I am and not make any changes to the organization or my process? Right? That's just Agile on the wall, or waterfall on the wall, or whatever you want to call it. So there you go. You're welcome for that non-answer.
We have time for one more question.
I got a mic.
So this is our last question.
Is it on? Hello? There we go. So my question is something I'm struggling with my teams with now is that they understand the breaking down the stories and vertical slices, but the problem that they're running up against is when we take one epic and we break them down into independent stories, all of those stories tend to be on the same page, and they're running into, when we all work on these independent stories at the same time, there's all kinds of conflicts, and we're all working in the same code base at the same exact time on the same page, and that causes them more strife than good, and they end up getting slowed down. Do you have any advice on how to do that, or is we approaching this from the wrong direction?
Good question. So I'm going to change that question to, we have a code base that does not allow us to work on multiple stories at the same time. So the answer to that question is, how do I change my code base so that we can have multiple people working on things at the same time? One way to do that is to write all new code for that stuff and eventually move away from the original code. And I would point you to books like, oh my God. I don't spend a lot of time in the technical areas, but this is technical Agile, so TDD, refactoring, all that kind of stuff. And you know, sometimes people say, oh, refactoring, that's just changing code. No, there are a whole multiple 100-page books on doing refactoring. It's not just changing code. So I would point you in that direction. So books like Emergent Design, Asterisk Refactoring, Asterisk TDD, Asterisk BDD, Asterisk. Any of those books would be a great place to look.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. All other questions require beer.